What's going on, everyone? You're back with your boy Jono for another quick math lesson. Today we're going to be looking at inheritance pedigrees, specifically looking at whether or not a trait is dominant or recessive. What we need to learn about this lesson is how specific traits or characteristics get passed down through a family tree. We can actually trace a huge amount of data through these family trees and really look back through multiple generations to see why or why not you've got attached earlobes. For this lesson, the terminology that we're going to use has already been discussed. You should already know that. If you do need to refresh this terminology, I do have a video going through that as well. The other thing that we do need to know is you have to be 100% on top of Punnett squares. The last video I put up was about Punnett squares, so if you do need a hand, please go back to that vid because it will just go through some of the stuff you need for this one. So there are only 3 skills we need in order to get these ones correct, and 2 of them are just looking at shapes. The major thing that we've got to be able to do is recognize whether or not something's recessive or dominant based on whether or not that trait is expressed in an individual. So the first step that we need to do is we absolutely have to write down the letters associated with the alleles in the question. So this means that the capital letter for that dominant allele has to be written down, and the lowercase letter for the recessive one needs to be written as well. Again, like our Punnett squares, I would 100% recommend writing these down at the very start of the question. This proper preparation is the most important thing in order to access these questions. The second thing that I want you to do is write out for sure what you know. And this is always going to be our homozygous recessive. When we have a look in more detail of these pedigrees, you're going to see which traits aren't shown. And this means that they have to be recessive. Don't stress out if you don't know if something's homozygous dominant or heterozygous. We just know that because the trait's expressed, there has to be a dominant allele in there. But because we know that for a recessive thing to be shown, it has to be lowercase, we can throw this information down immediately. And the last thing we need to do in order to smash this is if you look for a situation where the parents are the same, but they have a different offspring, that's where we're really going to be able to see quite a lot of our information. So just looking for, hey, are the parents colored in and the offspring's not, is one of the things that you have to do. So if you can look at different colors, you're going to get marks immediately. Just before we rip into the questions, we just need to know that the different shapes mean the different gender, and a circle is female and a square is male. And then a shaded box is saying that this box absolutely has the trait that we are looking for. And then if it's unshaded, it means that it doesn't have that characteristic that we are looking for in our pedigree. So we've got 2 options. Is the trait dominant or is the trait recessive? If it's dominant, it means that it's shaded in if there is a dominant allele present. So if it's big T or big T little t. Either one of these we say, hey, if you've got this and then it's shaded in, it's a dominant trait. And that means if we're looking for a recessive trait, it's only shaded in if it is little t. So if it's homozygous recessive, that means that we see what we are looking for, and that means that's what's being tracked through the pedigree. So recessive traits only are shown when it is little t. So the questions you'll get will look something like this. You'll get given a pedigree and you'll have to work out whether or not it's a recessive or a dominant trait. So there's going to be a heap of fluff around the question, talking about specifically what gene we're looking at, but this is what it really boils down to. This trait, is it recessive or is it dominant? So the first thing we need to do is write down our alleles. For this, I'm going to use big G and little g. Big G is dominant, little g is recessive. Now, if I want to see if this is a recessive trait, I've got to say that every single shaded in box has to be little g, because shaded in means I've got what I'm looking for. Then finally, I need to look at a specific situation where the parents are one thing and one of the offsprings is another. So if we have a look over here, we've got 2 shaded in parents and 1 unshaded in kid. So this is where we're going to really focus our attention. So if this is recessive, that means the 2 parents have to be little g in order for them to express that trait, because it's recessive. But if these are both little g, when we do our cross on our Punnett square, we would only get little g offsprings. So that means every single kid would have to be shaded in. Because one of them's not shaded in, we know for sure it cannot be a recessive trait. Just to check, let's see if this could be dominant. Because dominant could be big G, or big G, little g, either one of those would be shaded if that dominant allele is present. So let's say that the parents were both heterozygous, big G, little g. If we did their cross, we know that 1 out of 4 times they could have an offspring that is little g, little g. And that would result in an unshaded kid. So that means this situation 100% could occur because both parents would be dominant, they would show the trait, but they could have a kid that was recessive. So they're both carriers of the gene, and their kid is then recessive. So that means this whole situation has to be a dominant trait because the dominant thing is shaded in, that's what we're looking for, and the recessive just absolutely couldn't work. Now we're going to look at another question that's almost exactly the same. Immediately we've got to assign our letters. We've got big T and little t for this one. We are going to look at our recessive information first again, and recessive for this one would mean that little t would be shaded in. Again, we've got to look at our parents at the same with a kid that is a different shaded in. So over here, we've got 2 shaded in parents with some unshaded in kids. If this was recessive, we would have little t parents. And again, we know that the cross from this would only result in little t kids. So this means that this could not happen. This is definitely not a recessive trait. Again, just to check, let's see if it could be dominant. We know that a heterozygous cross, big T, little t of the parents, could have dominant kids that display the trait, and they could have kids that don't display the trait. Even though there are 3 recessive ones in this example, that could still just happen. It's only a 25% chance to happen, so it's unlikely, but this situation is 100% possible. So again, this means this must be a dominant trait that we are tracking through this pedigree. Last one here, is this one recessive or dominant? Again, I'm going to give this big D and little d. So again, let's have a look at our recessives first. So for this one, recessive would be little d, means that it is shaded in. So again, we need to look at some parents that are the same, that have a different offspring, and this actually happens on both sides of this pedigree. I'm going to focus over here, and because I know that the recessive one has to be shaded in, this circle here has to be little d. Again, if the parents were heterozygous, as in big D, little d, and they crossed, we could have a situation where 3 kids are dominant for that trait, and one of the kids is recessive, which we would have to shade in. That's 100% possible in this example, but just to make sure, let's check our dominant alleles just in case. For the dominant, big D, or heterozygous, big D, would result in shaded in. So that means that shaded circle would have to be big D, or big D. In this situation though, because the dominant alleles are shaded in, that means both the parents would have to be little d. Again, a cross of all recessive traits has to give offspring that are 100% recessive, so this definitely could not happen. So for this example, the thing that we are tracking through the pedigree 100% has to be recessive. So some of these questions are going to be way more in detail. They're going to be multi-part questions, but this is the major step that we need to do. If we can see how the cross between 2 parents occurs to give a whole slew of different options for the offspring, we know we are in the money. Having a really good foundation of the Punnett squares is incredibly important. It means you don't have to draw them out every single time, but if you do need to do that, go nuts. This is one way that you can ensure that you're going to get 100% for these questions. But really, we are just looking at, hey, what traits are there present in the parents and what are possible when we look at the offspring afterwards. So please make sure you're on top of that terminology, dominant, recessive, heterozygous, homozygous. If you've got that and you take the time during these pedigrees to write down what you know and really work on the crosses available, I guarantee you're going to get 100% for these questions. Thanks so much for watching. Smash that subscribe button and I'll see you later.